Welcome to VsoW, the deep dive, where we tear through complex source material to get straight to the critical knowledge you need.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're tackling a subject that really sits at a fascinating intersection: race, politics, social dynamics.
Absolutely. We're looking at let's call it the enduring political paradox of African American Republicans.
That's it. And there's this inherent tension, isn't there, between, well, deeply rooted racial group solidarity
And the pull of individual self-interest. Plus, you've got this intense social pressure kind of policing political behavior within the Black community. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. So our mission in this deep dive, for you listening, is to unpack these complex, often, contradictory narratives.
Yeah, we need to get beyond just the surface level takes.
We're examining, okay, when does defection from these established group norms actually happen? How is that defection policed? What are the mechanisms?
And importantly, what are the different ways, the sort of ideological justifications that people use when they do decide to cross party lines? Because it's not monolithic.
Definitely not. Now, given how charged this topic can be,
Extremely.
we have to approach it formally. We're sticking strictly to the evidence in our sources, and we've got quite a range. Political science experiments, APSR stuff.
Right, top-tier academic work, but also contemporary media analysis, sociological studies.
So the goal here isn't to take sides, obviously. It's to analyze the arguments, the data, the experiences presented in these sources as impartially as possible.
Exactly. Let the sources speak.
Okay, let's dive in. Section 1. The foundation of Black political solidarity. We need to understand the group norms, the self-interest factor, and how social pressure works to, well, keep things in line.
So for a long time, political science has leaned on this idea called the Black utility heuristic, BUH for short.
Right, BUH, I've seen that term.
The basic idea is that Black voters often use racial group interest as a kind of shortcut, a proxy for their own self-interest.
Meaning, if something seems good for the group overall, the individual tends to assume it's good for them too.
Precisely. It's a form of low information rationality. Makes sense historically, given shared experiences and policy impacts.
But the research we're digging into today complicates that, right?
Yeah.
It shifts focus to what the source calls known conflicts.
Yes, exactly. Known conflicts. These are situations where an individual can clearly see a trade-off.
A direct clash between what's perceived as best for the racial group, usually meaning supporting Democrats, and what's best for their simple personal self-interest.
Right. The sources give some pretty clear examples. Think about, say, middle-class Black individuals looking at redistributive programs, maybe good for the group broadly, but potentially not for their personal bottom line.
Or, maybe even more pointedly, an anti-abortion Black voter. Their core belief aligns them with a key Republican platform plank.
But voting Republican directly violates that strong established group norm of Democratic support. That's a known conflict.
So the big question becomes, when you have these clear conflicts, what wins out? What determines the choice?
And to even start answering that, you have to grasp just how incredibly strong, how crystallized that norm of Democratic support actually is.
Crystallized. That's the term the APSR study uses, isn't it?
It is, and it fits perfectly. This isn't just a slight preference. It's intense, it's stable over decades.
The numbers are pretty staggering when you look at them.
They really are. The sources point out since 1964, consistently over 80% of Black voters have gone for the Democratic presidential nominee every single time.
And during the Obama elections.
It's spiked even higher. We're talking 93% to 95%. That level of political unity is just remarkable. It defines what we mean by a crystallized norm.
Okay, if a norm is that strong, there must be powerful ways to enforce it. What happens when someone does deviate? What's the enforcement mechanism?
That's where the APSR study gets really specific. It identifies racialized social pressure and reputational sanctions.
Racialized social pressure, meaning it comes from within the group.
Primarily, yes. And the sanctions, the consequences for defecting can be severe. Think about the terms we hear.
Uncle Tom, sellout. Those aren't just abstract insults.
No, they're linguistic markers. They signal real social consequences, real reputational damage for breaking the norm. They're tools of enforcement.
The APSR study is great here because it didn't just theorize, it ran experiments. Real stakes. Let's talk about experiment 1, self-interest versus public scrutiny. How did they set the baseline?
Okay, so they gave participants $100, actual cash, and told them they could donate it to either the Obama campaign or the Romney campaign.
Real donations being made.
Right. And in the control group, just making that choice privately, the norm held incredibly strong. The average donation was $90 out of $100 to Obama.
Wow, $90. That confirms the baseline loyalty is intense. So how did they introduce that known conflict, the self-interest part?
They offered a small but real financial incentive to defect. They told subjects, for every $10 you donate to Romney, you personally get $1 back in cash, up to a $10 payout.
Okay, a direct cash incentive to go against the grain. What happened?
In that condition, where the choice was private but there was cash on the table, loyalty dropped significantly.
How much?
The average contribution to Obama fell by over $20, down to about $68.
So just the potential for a $10 gain was enough to make people shift $20 away from the group norm when no one was looking.
Exactly. It's pretty clear proof that self-interest, even relatively small financial self-interest, can override group loyalty in private.
Okay, that establishes self-interest is a real factor. But the theory hinges on social pressure constraining that. How did making the choice public change things?
This is where it gets really compelling. They ran another condition, same monetary incentive to donate to Romney, but they told subjects their names and donation amounts would be published in the university newspaper.
Ah, the threat of public disclosure. Social consequences made explicit.
Precisely. And faced with that, the potential for being publicly shamed or sanctioned, defection plummeted.
Back towards the baseline.
Almost exactly back to baseline levels. The contributions to Obama shot back up. The fear of social fallout essentially canceled out the cash incentive.
That's a powerful finding. The potential embarrassment, the loss of standing within the group, literally outweighed guaranteed money in their pocket.
It demonstrates a quantifiable deterrent effect of social pressure.
But does that pressure have to be racialized? Does the scrutiny need to come from other Black people? That brings us to experiment 2, right? The role of in-group monitoring.
Yes, this experiment was designed to isolate that specific factor. Is it just being watched, or is it who is watching?
How did they test that?
Okay, subjects got $10. They could keep it maximize self-interest or donate it to an Obama box where it would be matched. Making the decision alone, what do you think happened?
Based on the last experiment, I'd guess they get most of it.
You got it. Average contribution to Obama was only $3.74 out of $10. They prioritized the cash one alone.
Okay, so what happened when someone else was in the room? A Confederate, part of the study.
Right. They had a Confederate walk in and very obviously donate their entire $10 to the Obama box, clearly signaling the expected group behavior.
Did it matter who the Confederate was?
Critically, yes. When the Confederate acting out the norm was white, it had basically no effect. Subject contributions stayed low, around the same as when they were alone.
Interesting. So just being watched by anyone wasn't enough.
Nope. But when the Confederates who donated the $10 to Obama was Black,
Let me guess, contributions went up.
significantly. The average contribution jumped to $6.85.
Wow. So the monitoring had to be racialized. The pressure needed to come from an in-group member, even a stranger, to actually change behavior and enforce the norm.
That's the strong implication. It really highlights the power of in-group dynamics and monitoring.
The sources mention things like Black churches, HBCUs, places where this kind of in-group monitoring is naturally facilitated.
Exactly. These social networks create, as the study puts it, a unique ability to rein in defection compared to maybe less tightly knit political groups.
Okay, so pressure enforces the norm, but can you use pressure to break the norm? That was experiment 3, trying to push people towards Romney.
They tried. Subjects were offered the cash incentive to donate to Romney, and a Black Confederate came in and very publicly donated all their money to Romney, signaling defection.
So pressure to defect from another Black person, did it work?
Largely, no. It was mostly ineffective. Even with the cash incentive and the Black Confederate defecting, subjects still gave, on average, over $70 out of $100 to Obama.
So the norm is really sticky. You can reinforce it with social pressure, but it's very hard to use that same pressure to make people violate it.
It underscores just how deeply rooted that crystallized norm is.
The study also looked at psychological factors, right? Who was more or less susceptible to defecting?
Yes, they looked at moderators. For instance, people who already believed in using those sanctions, like sellout or Uncle Tom, were less likely to defect for money.
So if you internally accept the legitimacy of the social pressure, you're less likely to risk triggering it.
That seems to be the case. Your own belief acts as a constraint.
And what about the people who really valued money?
That was maybe the most revealing finding. They measured how much subjects prioritized financial gain, how much happiness they tied to wealth.
Okay.
Those who placed a high personal value on money, they were much more likely to defect for the cash incentive.
And were they affected by the public disclosure threat?
Get this. They were the only group who seemed immune to it. The threat of social sanctioning didn't significantly change their behavior. For them, the money was the ultimate driver, outweighing social costs.
That's fascinating. So for a subset, financial self-interest trumps even the fear of public shaming within the group.
It appears so. It suggests a limit to the power of social pressure for certain individuals.
What really struck me was the finding about traditional measures like linked fate or party ID.
Yeah, that was counterintuitive. You'd expect strong Democrats or those with high linked fate to be the most resistant to defecting.
But the study found those factors didn't really predict behavior when that direct self-interest conflict was introduced.
Correct. In these specific conflict scenarios, the mechanisms of racialized social pressure and the individual's value of money seem to be more powerful predictors than those broader attitudes.
It really makes the case that this racialized social pressure is a distinct and very potent force in Black politics, especially when group and self-interest clash directly.
A unique and powerful check, as the study concludes.
Okay, this detailed experimental evidence gives us a strong foundation. Now let's move to Section 2. The Republican strategy and what one source calls the obligatory fiction. Because if that social pressure is so intense,
Then being a Black Republican automatically puts you in a really paradoxical position.
the Princeton source talks about them being seen historically as rare fellows or even traitorous individuals. That language is strong.
It reflects the high cost of affiliation. This perception isn't new, it's deeply rooted. Remember that old SNL sketch from the 80s they mentioned?
Vaguely, yeah. The Negro Republican.
Yeah. It perfectly captured that historical stereotype, the Black Republican, as this sort of exotic anomaly, almost needing sedation. It frames GOP affiliation as a rejection of the collective struggle.
And that narrative you quoted, traitorous individuals complicit in an age-old crusade to delegitimize the Black quest for racial and social justice, that really shows the power of those reputational sanctions we saw in the experiments.
It absolutely does. The social cost is made explicit.
Yet people still choose this path. The sources suggest many Black Republicans see it as a pragmatic strategy.
Yes, there's an argument that working within the two-party system, even within a party that might seem hostile sometimes, is the practical way to gain leverage, force concessions, maybe achieve power.
But that pursuit seems to come with strings attached,
Right.
narrative strings. The Guardian source talks about this obligatory fiction, the bootstraps mythology.
Right. To gain real prominence within the GOP, it seems Black Republicans are often required to embody this very specific story.
The story that hard work, and only hard work, determines success in America.
Exactly. And if you accept that premise that America is purely meritocratic, then the flip side has to be true too. If someone hasn't succeeded, it's because they just didn't work hard enough. Individual failing, not systemic issues.
And to make that stick, they often have to make very public denials, don't they?
It seems required. Denying systemic racism, extolling self-reliance, this performance validates the party's framework and pushes back against criticism. Their value politically is tied to how well they perform this narrative.
The sources dive into specific examples where these backstories faced intense scrutiny. Senator Tim Scott is a major one.
Scott's story emphasizes humble beginnings, his grandfather's journey from illiteracy to hard work. But critics jump on the omission that this same grandfather eventually owned, 900 acres?
Right, a significant asset accumulation that complicates the simple pull-yourself-up narrative.
And then you have his very public statements, America is not a racist country, his warnings against teaching kids they're oppressors. It looks like fulfilling a required role to gain influence in the party.
A post-racial narrative that essentially absolves the party, and maybe the country, of ongoing responsibility for racial inequality.
That's certainly the critique. Then you have the Herschel Walker example from his Senate run. He was really pushed as the embodiment of this.
But his story started to unravel under scrutiny, didn't it?
Big time. Claims of graduating top 1% from UGA. Turn out he didn't graduate at all. Claims about his business success and net worth were also challenged and found lacking.
And the sources suggest that when that obligatory fiction crumbles, the political utility of the figure diminishes rapidly.
It shows how much rides on the perceived authenticity of that specific bootstrap story for these individuals within the GOP.
We're seeing this strategy play out right now with this new video series, America's Starting Five. Scott, Byron Donalds, Wesley Hunt, Burgess Owens, John James.
Yeah, a very polished, targeted recruitment effort aimed at Black voters, particularly men.
And their main angle seems to be attacking Democrats for being arrogant or condescending.
Exactly. They're really zeroing in on past comments by Joe Biden, the "you ain't black" line from 2020.
And that poor kids are just as bright as white kids, remark from 2019.
They frame these not just as mistakes, but as proof of democratic entitlement, suggesting the party takes black voters for granted and actually harms them.
And they contrast that with their own success stories. Wesley Hunt arguing that because they won in majority white districts, it proves MLK's dream is fulfilled, that they're judged on character, not color.
It's a direct claim of post-racial achievement, fitting perfectly with that obligatory fiction framework.
But does this high-level success mean the social pressure from the broader black community isn't working on them? Or is it just that they've reached a level where they can withstand it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Critics see this whole effort as, frankly, insulting.
The Griot source quoted someone calling it that, yeah. Arguing these same figures have aligned with policies that undermine things like voting rights.
Right. The critique is that they aren't actually acting in the group's interest, despite their claims.
Another strategist, Amicia Cross, basically called it a PR stunt, designed to create the appearance of a shift among black men towards the GOP.
But likely aimed more at convincing white conservatives than actually persuading black voters. She seems skeptical it would actually resonate with the intended audience.
So you have this intense dynamic, high value to the GOP if they perform the role, but facing significant dismissal and sanction from large parts of the black community.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3. We have to look inside African-American republicanism, move past just calling people sellouts, and understand the actual ideological differences.
Because it's not just one thing. The sociologist Corey Fields argues there are distinct worldviews at play.
He identifies two main types based on how they understand and incorporate race into their conservatism. First, the race-blind Republicans.
Race-blind. Okay, what's their core philosophy?
Fundamentally, they believe racial identity and discrimination are basically marginal issues today. If there are disparities, they attribute them mostly to individual choices, maybe cultural issues or pathological values, as the source puts it.
So, very assimilationist. How does that translate into policy?
They tend to frame everything in universal terms. Fiscal conservatism, tax cuts, fairness are bile. These are presented as good for everyone, regardless of race. They actively try to take race out of the policy equation.
The goal is to be seen just as American, race, secondary, or irrelevant.
That seems to be the driving force.
Yeah.
The example given is an entrepreneur named Kevin focused on repealing the inheritance tax.
The death tax?
Right. He framed it purely as class warfare, haves versus have-nots, an issue of fairness for everybody. He explicitly said black people need to stop seeing everything in black and white.
That really captures the race-blind perspective. Ignoring race is seen as the path to full integration.
Exactly. Now contrast that sharply with the second group, the racial uplift Republicans.
Okay, racial uplift. How are they different?
They start from a very different place. They often do acknowledge structural racism, blocked opportunities. They see those as real problems.
So they don't deny systemic issues necessarily.
Not always, no. But, and this is key, they pair that acknowledgement with a very strong emphasis on individual and collective responsibility within the black community to overcome those barriers.
And they see conservative policies as the way to achieve that uplift.
Precisely. They argue that things like low taxes, school vouchers, free market approaches are actually the best tools specifically for black community advancement and middle-class success.
So, unlike the race-blind group, they're explicitly framing GOP policies through a racial lens, arguing these are the solutions for the black community.
Exactly. It's about group empowerment through conservative means. The source mentions Stephen, who argues low taxes boost black entrepreneurship, contrasting it with welfare creating dependency.
And Samuel, seeing school vouchers as giving black parents direct control over schools, taking power back for the community.
Right. So both groups might support the same tax cut or voucher program, but the reasoning, the meaning they attach to it, and how they connect it to their black identity is completely different.
Race-blind sees ignoring race as the path to assimilation. Racial uplift sees using conservative tools as the path to group progress and responsibility.
It's a critical distinction, and often the public discourse gets dominated by the more provocative race-blind figures, which hides this internal diversity within black conservatism.
This internal complexity gets amplified even more in today's political environment, doesn't it? Which brings us to Section 4, the black-MAGA conflict and the defectors' accountability. The Trump era really put a spotlight on this.
No doubt. The rise of visible, vocal black supporters of Donald Trump, the so-called blackmailing phenomenon, intensified all these dynamics, especially when some of those supporters later expressed regret.
Right. The sources picked up on the public debates around that regret. There seemed to be two very polarized viewpoints. Let's start with the critical debate. Take the argument against sympathy for defectors who have regrets.
Yeah, the commentary highlighted in the YouTube transcripts is pretty blunt. Zero sympathy. The core argument is that the regret is purely self-serving.
Like, you only regret it now because it stopped benefiting you.
Exactly that. And the critics emphasize the harm caused by that initial support, pointing to immigrants, women, children, who they argue suffered directly because of those votes.
There's a real sense of demanding accountability, isn't there? Not just letting people quietly rejoin the fold.
Absolutely. Talk of karma, arguing racism is expensive, implying these voters need to feel the consequences personally. There's almost a mocking tone towards the idea that they expected acceptance within a movement seen by critics as hostile.
Okay, so that's the accountability side. What about the Magier supporters' perspective? How do they justify their initial choice, even if others regret it?
Their narrative is often about personal liberation, feeling freed from what they call leftist ideology, finding hope.
One supporter controversially called Trump the first black president.
Yes, claiming he actually addressed black community issues that others, including Obama, supposedly ignored. It's a provocative framing, clearly.
And they justify some of the really hardline policies, like immigration enforcement.
They do. The transcripts show supporters framing icy raids as delivering exactly what we wanted for community safety, sending immigrants back to make our streets safer.
So the justification is very pragmatic, focused on a narrow definition of local safety, perhaps overriding other concerns.
That seems to be the argument presented. Prioritizing perceived immediate safety benefits, even from controversial policies, it shows the deep ideological divide.
It really highlights the intense pressures and the high stakes around political defection. But even for those firmly in the Republican camp, acceptance isn't always guaranteed, is it?
Yeah.
The Rob Smith incident seems relevant here.
Right. Rob Smith, black, gay, Republican influencer, Army vet, he shared footage of being aggressively heckled at a conservative event.
With racial and homophobic slurs. F.
Yes, attributed to white supremacists at a pro-Trump gathering in Phoenix.
The reactions to that incident were really telling, weren't they?
They were split. You had prominent conservatives condemning it, calling it disgusting, unacceptable, standard denunciation.
But then there was another reaction.
Yeah, mockery from critics.
Yeah.
The sentiment was basically, what did you expect? Someone tweeted he joined the face-eating leopard party and is shocked the leopards are eating his face.
It underscores that precarious position, aligning with a movement that some elements within might still view you with hostility, regardless of your political loyalty.
A very high-risk affiliation, potentially.
Finally, let's look at how these dynamics play out at the highest levels. Specifically, how figures like Representative Byron Donalds handle the constant discussion around identity, especially Vice President Kamala Harris's.
There was that public exchange with a journalist where Donalds was pressed on why Trump and his allies keep bringing up Harris's racial identity.
His response was to dismiss it.
Pretty much. Called it a phony controversy, a side issue stirred up by the media. He insisted the focus should be purely on her policy record, inflation, the border, foreign policy.
But the journalists pushed back right, pointing out that Donalds and other Trump supporters are the ones raising the identity question.
Exactly. The counter was, you claim identity doesn't matter, yet you keep questioning hers. It looks like using racial rhetoric as a political tool while pretending to be above it.
How did Donalds handle that?
He tried to deflect, mentioning the Associated Press focusing on her Indian-American background initially, but ultimately he fell back on that race-blind framing we discussed.
Dismissing identity is something the media gloms onto, insisting policy impact is all that matters to Americans, no matter your race, no matter your color, no matter your creed.
It's a textbook example of the race-blind Republican trying to navigate this. Asserting race is irrelevant for policy while simultaneously being accused of using racial identity politics tactically.
It really does seem like a complex dance they have to perform. Fulfill the obligatory fiction for the party, deny the relevance of race, but then fend off accusations of weaponizing identity themselves.
And his defense strategy focus only on universal policy impacts perfectly mirrors that race-blind ideology we outlined earlier, trying to frame his stance as universally applicable, devoid of racial calculation.
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We started with that core finding from the experiments.
that Black political behavior is powerfully shaped by these intense, racialized social norms. They're measurable, they're strong.
And we saw that defection is possible, especially when personal self-interest is clearly engaged, like with the cash incentive.
But crucially, the threat of social sanctioning, that racialized pressure, acts as a potent brake on that defection. The fear of being called out, even by a stranger, often outweighs personal gain.
Then we saw how this plays out in the real world with the rise of visible Black Republicans. They face this immense pressure, and to navigate it, especially within the GOP, they often adopt these specific ideological frames.
The assimilationist race-blind approach, trying to make race irrelevant, versus the racial uplift approach, using conservative policies specifically for perceived group benefit.
And this navigation often requires performing that obligatory fiction of the bootstraps narrative, while simultaneously dealing with skepticism or even hostility, sometimes from within their own party and certainly from the broader Black community.
That dual pressure really defines their political existence, performing for the party, weathering the sanctions from the group.
So it leaves us with this really provocative final thought, sitting right at the tension point in our sources. On one hand, the political science shows these democratic norms are incredibly deep-rooted, crystallized, resistant to change on a mass scale.
Decades of data, powerful experimental evidence showing resistance to defection pressure.
But on the other hand, you are seeing more high-profile Black Republicans, more visibility, more internal ideological debate within that group becoming public.
Figures like Scott, Donald, the starting five, they are undeniably more visible than perhaps ever before.
So the question we're left with is this. Does this growing visibility and internal differentiation among Black Republicans signal that those long-standing political norms are actually starting to erode, maybe slowly, maybe over generations?
Or is what we're seeing just a more public, maybe louder version of the same fundamental tension between self-interest and group solidarity that those experiments picked up years ago? Is it just the outliers becoming more visible while the core norm remains intact?
It feels like the answer to that could tell us a lot about the future of political identity in America.
It really could. A fascinating question to ponder.
We definitely invite you, our listeners, to continue thinking about this. Subscribe to The Deep Dive for more analyses like this one.
And please, like this deep dive, comment below. Let us know your thoughts on these complex dynamics of group solidarity versus self-interest in politics.
Thank you for listening to VsoW.